The Nevada desert stretched endless beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Heat shimmered off the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base, distorting the silhouettes of F-16 Fighting Falcons lined up like sleeping predators. The year was 2006, and the temperature had climbed past 110 degrees by noon. 20-year-old Lieutenant Elena Reese stood beside her aircraft, sweat tracing lines down her neck beneath a flight suit that felt 2 sizes too tight. Her hands trembled as she checked her pre-flight for the 3rd time. She could feel the eyes on her back, could hear the whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. "Third woman to make it this far in the program," someone muttered from the hangar shadow. "But she won't finish. None of them do." "Doesn't have the instinct," another voice agreed. "You can teach someone to fly, can't teach them to be a killer." Elena's jaw tightened. She'd heard it all before. At the academy, in flight school, during basic fighter maneuvers. Always the same refrain, like a song she couldn't escape. Women didn't belong in fighters. Women couldn't handle the G-forces. Women couldn't make the split-second decisions that separated the living from the dead. She'd proved them wrong at every step. But this was fighter weapons school, the final exam, the place where legends were born or dreams died screaming. "Lieutenant Reese," the voice cut through the desert heat like a blade. Elena turned to find Colonel Franklin Blackwell standing 10 feet away, his flight suit crisp despite the temperature, his eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses that reflected her own nervous face back at her. At 47, Blackwell was a living legend. 214 combat missions, Desert Storm, operations over Iraq, the kind of pilot other pilots talked about in hushed tones, the way civilians talked about gods. His call sign was Ironside, earned the hard way when he'd brought a crippled F-15 home through a sandstorm that had grounded every other aircraft in theater. "Sir," Elena snapped to attention, grateful that her voice didn't crack. Blackwell pulled off his sunglasses. His eyes were the color of slate, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. "You're scared," he said. Not a question, a statement. Elena opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. Lying to Ironside was like lying to gravity, pointless and dangerous. "Yes, sir." "Good." Blackwell stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "In Desert Storm, I watched men die who weren't scared. Overconfident, thought they were invincible. You know what happened to them? They made mistakes, sir. They got cocky, forgot that every time you strap into that cockpit, you're making a deal with death. You're saying, 'Not today.' And death is patient. Death waits for you to forget to be scared." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not comfort, exactly, but understanding. "Your classmates think you don't belong here," Blackwell continued. His voice was conversational now, almost gentle. "They think women don't have the edge, the killer instinct, the ability to make the hard calls when the missiles are flying and your wingman is dying." Each word landed like a punch. Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You know what I think, Lieutenant?" "No, sir." Blackwell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those slate eyes, something that might have been respect. "I think they're half right." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena felt her throat tighten, felt the sting of tears she absolutely would not shed. Not here, not in front of him. "You don't have their edge," Blackwell said. "You don't have their bravado. You don't have their stupid, arrogant, suicidal confidence." He paused, let the words hang in the superheated air. "You have something better. You have fear. And fear, properly channeled, properly controlled, makes you careful, makes you precise, makes you the kind of pilot who brings everyone home." Elena stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "So here's your final exam, Lieutenant. You're going to take that bird up. You're going to simulate complete hydraulic failure at 20,000 feet. No power steering, no hydraulic brakes, manual reversion only. You're going to bring her down dead stick, put her on that runway, like you're landing on your grandmother's good china. Sir, the training manual says it's nearly impossible. The training manual says only suicidal idiots attempt it. The training manual was written by people who never had to choose between impossible and dead. Blackwell stepped so close she could see the sun-weathered lines around his eyes, could smell the coffee on his breath. Which are you, Lieutenant Reese? The quiet professional who survives? Or just another washout who proved the doubters right? Elena met his gaze and held it. Something crystallized inside her, hard and unbreakable as diamond. The one who survives and saves others, sir. The ghost of a smile touched Blackwell's lips. Then prove it. 30 minutes later, Elena was at 20,000 feet, her F-16 cutting through the azure sky like a silver bullet. The desert floor sprawled beneath her, all ochre and rust in ancient stone. Her radio crackled. Reaper 2-1, this is Control. Begin emergency simulation on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. Elena's hand moved to the hydraulic system cutoff. One switch, one moment, the difference between controlled flight and barely managed chaos. She flipped it. The change was immediate and terrifying. The control stick, which had responded to the gentlest pressure, suddenly required all her strength to move. The aircraft, which had been an extension of her will, became a living thing fighting her for control. Every input had to be anticipated, calculated, forced. 20,000 feet, 15,000. The runway appeared in the distance, a thin gray line against the tan earth. It looked impossibly small, impossibly far. 10,000 feet. Her arms were already burning. The G-suit squeezed her legs and abdomen, helping blood stay in her brain, but it couldn't help her wrangle a multi-ton fighter jet with no hydraulic assist. Every pilot's nightmare, every fighter jock's secret fear. 5,000 feet, the radio crackled again. Reaper 2-1, you are cleared to abort. Repeat, you are cleared to abort simulation. Elena's hand hovered over the hydraulic restore switch. One flip, one moment, she could bring the power back, make the stick light again, land with the gentle precision of a training sortie. One flip, and everyone would know. The woman couldn't hack it. The woman had to quit. Her hand moved away from the switch. 3,000 feet. The runway rushed up to meet her. She could see the heat shimmer now, could see the emergency vehicles positioned along the taxiway, ready for her failure. 2,000 feet. Every muscle in her arm screamed. The stick felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her vision tunneled, sweat stinging her eyes behind the helmet visor. 1,000 feet. Come on, she whispered to the aircraft, to herself, to gravity and physics and everyone who'd ever doubted. Come on! The calculations happened in her hindbrain, in that place where training becomes instinct. Airspeed, descent rate, angle of attack, flare timing, differential throttle to keep the nose aligned because she had no hydraulics for the rudder. 500 feet, 200, 100, 50, 20, now. Elena pulled back on the stick with everything she had. Her shoulders and biceps burned like fire. The F-16's nose rose, bleeding speed, trading velocity for those last few precious seconds of lift. The main landing gear kissed the concrete with barely a chirp. The nose gear settled with the gentleness of a leaf touching water. She'd done it. The aircraft rolled to a stop at the far end of the runway. Elena sat in the cockpit, her hands still locked on the stick, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion, and something that might have been joy. The radio came to life. Colonel Blackwell's voice, flat and professional. Reaper 2-1 control. That was the most textbook dead stick landing I've seen in 25 years of flying. A pause. Welcome to the club, Lieutenant. That evening, in the debriefing room with its wall of photographs showing every graduate of fighter weapons school, Colonel Blackwell stood before the assembled class. The male pilots who'd whispered and doubted sat in rows, their faces carefully neutral. "Lieutenant Elena Reese," Blackwell said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment and finality, scored a perfect 100 on her final examination. First pilot in this class to achieve that distinction. First female pilot in the history of this program to achieve that distinction. He turned to Elena, who stood at attention, still feeling the phantom weight of that control stick in her arms. "From this moment forward, your call sign is Phoenix, because today you rose from the ashes of every doubt, every whisper, every person who said you couldn't. You rose, and you're going to keep rising." Elena's vision blurred with tears she finally allowed herself to shed. Not tears of weakness, tears of triumph. "Thank you, sir." Blackwell extended his hand. When she took it, his grip was firm and warm and somehow paternal. "Don't thank me, Phoenix. You did the impossible. You just needed someone to get out of your way and let you." The memories dissolved like morning mist as the Boeing 757's engines changed pitch, pulling Elena Morrison back to the present. She was 38 now, 18 years older than that terrified lieutenant in the Nevada desert. The jeans felt strange against her legs after months of flight suits. The navy sweater her sister had bought her for Christmas, the one that had hung unworn while she commanded the 455th Fighter Squadron through 18 months of hell, felt soft and foreign against her skin. United Flight 847 from San Francisco to Washington, Dulles. Seat 13F, window. Economy plus because colonels didn't rate business class on personal travel. And besides, she'd wanted to disappear. To be anonymous. To be anyone except Colonel Elena Reese Morrison, call sign Phoenix, whose face graced recruitment posters in the Pentagon and whose tactical innovations were taught at every fighter school in the Air Force. She pressed her forehead against the cool window and watched the patchwork farmlands of Kansas drift by below. From 35,000 feet, everything looked peaceful, ordered, safe. The geometric precision of wheat fields and irrigation circles, each one representing lives and stories she'd never know. People who woke up, went to work, loved their families, and never once had to decide whether to abandon a dying friend to save their own life. 8 months ago, Major Alex "Ghost" Turner had made that decision for her, had ordered her to leave him, to save herself, to keep flying. And Elena had obeyed that final order because that's what you did in combat. You followed orders even when they broke your heart, especially when they broke your heart. General Victoria Cross had practically dragged Elena into her office 3 weeks ago, had sat her down with that motherly firmness that made you feel like you were 10 years old again. "Morrison," Cross had said, using Elena's married name from a marriage that had ended badly 5 years ago. "You've been running on caffeine and duty for 2 years straight. Your squadron is home safe. Your mission reports are filed. And if I see you in my office before the 1st of May, I'm personally going to have the security forces escort you to the nearest beach." "Ma'am, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You lost Ghost 8 months ago, and you've been flying like you're trying to follow him into whatever comes next. That stops now. Take the leave, see your family, remember what normal looks like." So here she was, flying commercial for the first time in 18 months, heading to Arlington to visit her mother, who'd been asking when her decorated war hero daughter might actually come home for more than a 48-hour pass. Normal, Elena thought, watching the clouds drift past. She'd almost forgotten what that word meant. First time flying commercial in a while? Elena turned to find the flight attendant standing in the aisle. Her name tag read, Catherine Sullivan, and her smile held the practiced warmth of someone who'd spent years managing nervous flyers and demanding businessmen. She was maybe 48, with kind brown eyes and steel gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun. "Something like that," Elena replied, managing a small smile in return. Catherine refilled Elena's coffee cup with the precision of someone who'd mastered the art of pouring at altitude. The rich aroma mixed with the recycled cabin air, creating that unique atmosphere of commercial aviation. Part anticipation, part resignation, entirely familiar to anyone who'd ever lived their life in the sky. The flight attendant lingered for a moment, her experienced eye taking in details most passengers would miss. Elena's perfect posture, the way her eyes automatically tracked to the nearest emergency exits, the unconscious way she'd stowed her carry-on with military precision, everything squared away and secure. "Military?" Catherine asked quietly, her voice carrying the respect of someone who understood the weight of service. Elena hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the coffee cup. She'd hoped to blend in, to disappear into the anonymous crowd of travelers, to be just another face among the 127 souls aboard this aircraft. But something about her demeanor, perhaps the way she'd automatically cataloged emergency procedures during the safety demonstration, or the instinctive way she'd assessed the flight crew during boarding, had given her away. "Air Force," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible above the steady drone of the twin turbofan engines. Catherine's expression softened with immediate understanding. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to avoid disturbing nearby passengers. "My husband was Navy, 22 years, 3 deployments to the Gulf, retired last year as a senior chief." Her eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd lived through the unique challenges of military life. The deployments, the missed holidays, the constant gnawing worry. "I can always tell. It's something in the way you carry yourselves." She paused, glancing around to ensure their conversation remained private. "Thank you for your service, ma'am. Whatever you did over there, wherever there was for you, thank you." As Catherine moved on to attend to other passengers, Elena settled back into her seat, feeling both exposed and oddly comforted. Around her, the ordinary drama of civilian air travel continued to unfold in all its mundane complexity. In seat 13D, directly beside her, a businessman in his mid-40s pecked furiously at his laptop keyboard, his Bluetooth headset blinking steadily as he conducted what sounded like a heated conference call about quarterly projections and market penetration. Griffith Sterling, according to the name on the American Express card he'd used to purchase his overpriced airport sandwich. His world of spreadsheets and profit margins seemed impossibly distant from the life Elena had been living. Across the narrow aisle, a young woman named Deanna Harper struggled valiantly to keep her twin toddlers entertained. The boys, perhaps 3 years old, were fascinated by everything: the window shades, the tray tables, the overhead bins. Their father dozed fitfully beside them, his head tilted back at an uncomfortable angle, exhaustion written across his features. Elena recognized that particular bone-deep weariness. She'd seen it in the mirror often enough, the kind that came from months of hypervigilance finally giving way to the safety of home. Behind her, a group of college students shared earbuds and laughed over something on their phones. Spring break, most likely, heading home or to some beach destination. Their biggest worry was probably their next exam, or whether they'd remembered to set their streaming recordings. Their voices carried the easy confidence of youth, the assumption that the world was fundamentally safe and predictable. None of them knew that the quiet woman in the window seat had earned her call sign after coaxing a battle-damaged F-16 home through enemy fire over the Hindu Kush. None of them knew she'd been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for actions that had saved the lives of 200 Marines at a remote outpost, or that her tactical manual on close air support was required reading at every fighter school in the Air Force. To them, she was simply another passenger, maybe a teacher heading home for the weekend, or a businesswoman on her way to a conference, anonymous and unremarkable, exactly as she'd hoped to be. 3 rows ahead in first class, another passenger was having similar thoughts about anonymity, though his reasons were darker. General Franklin Blackwell, retired, sat in seat 3A with a leather overnight bag at his feet and a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with altitude or air pressure. At 68, he still carried himself with the bearing of a career military officer. Spine straight, shoulders squared, eyes that missed nothing even when they seemed to be staring at nothing at all. The bag at his feet contained his Class A dress blues, freshly pressed and waiting. In the outside pocket, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, sat a folded American flag, the kind they gave you at military funerals, the kind that was supposed to bring comfort but mostly just reminded you that someone you loved was gone and not coming back. Franklin was flying to Arlington National Cemetery to bury the last piece of his heart. Major Ethan Blackwell, age 26, killed in action, Iraq, 2008. 16 years ago now, but it might as well have been yesterday. 16 years, and Franklin still woke up some mornings expecting to hear his son's voice on the phone, still reached for the phone to call him with good news, still felt the phantom ache of a future that had died in the desert on the other side of the world. Ethan had been a fighter pilot, like his old man, had inherited Franklin's love of flying and his mother's fearless heart, had graduated top of his class from the academy, earned his wings, made his dad so damn proud that Franklin's chest had hurt with it. And then one day, on a routine combat air patrol over Fallujah, Ethan's F-16 had taken ground fire. Simple, bad luck. One bullet in a million, finding the one vulnerable point in all that armored steel and composites. Hydraulic failure, the same kind of catastrophic, cascading failure that Franklin had survived twice in his career. But Ethan hadn't been alone. His wingman, a kid named Lieutenant Nash, had taken fire too. Worse fire. Engine hit, losing altitude fast, trying to make it to friendly territory before he had to punch out. Ethan could have ejected, should have ejected. His bird was dying, and there was no shame in giving up a $30 million fighter to save your own life. That's what they trained you to do. Save yourself. Live to fight another day. But Ethan hadn't ejected. He'd stayed with his crippled aircraft, had used the last of his hydraulic pressure to keep Nash's dying bird stable, had talked the kid through the bailout procedures, had made sure Nash got out safe. And then Ethan's hydraulics had failed completely. No ejection seat, no way out. Just a fighter jet auguring into the Iraqi desert at 400 knots. They'd given Franklin a folded flag and a medal to go with all the other medals he'd accumulated over 33 years of service. They'd told him his son died a hero. They'd meant it as comfort. It wasn't. Franklin had spent 16 years telling himself it wasn't his fault, that he hadn't pushed Ethan too hard, hadn't filled his son's head with stories of glory and honor and duty, hadn't made flying seem like the only thing worth doing with your life. He'd spent 16 years lying to himself, and now he was flying to Arlington to stand over his son's grave one final time, to say the things he should have said when Ethan was alive, to ask forgiveness for sins that couldn't be forgiven, because the person who needed to forgive him was gone. Franklin reached for the glass of bourbon the flight attendant had brought him. His hand was steady. It was always steady. 33 years of flying fighters had taught him to keep his hand steady no matter what his heart was doing. He'd been staring at the seat back in front of him for the last hour, not really seeing it, lost in memories and regrets, when movement in economy caught his eye. A woman in jeans and a navy sweater walking down the aisle toward the lavatories. Brunette, late 30s, moving with that particular economy of motion that marked military training as clearly as a uniform. Franklin's trained eye cataloged details automatically. The perfect posture that never quite left you, even in civilian clothes. The way her eyes swept the cabin, noting exits and obstacles without conscious thought. The controlled precision of every movement. And something else. Something in the set of her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. The look of someone carrying a weight that had nothing to do with luggage. Their eyes met for half a second as she passed. Franklin felt recognition slam into him like a fist to the chest. Lieutenant Elena Reese. No, not lieutenant anymore. The rank insignia on her carry-on luggage tag said colonel. And the call sign printed below the rank wasn't anything he'd given her. Phoenix. His Phoenix. The scared kid who'd looked at him with terror and determination in equal measure, who'd told him she was the one who survived and saved others, who'd proven him right in ways he'd never imagined. Franklin watched her disappear into the forward lavatory, his mind racing. What were the odds? What possible cosmic coincidence had put them both on the same flight, heading to the same city, carrying their own private griefs? He should go talk to her, should tell her he'd followed her career, read every report, felt pride swell in his chest every time he heard someone mention the legendary Phoenix. Should tell her that training her had been one of the great privileges of his life. But something held him back. Maybe it was the weight she was carrying, visible in every line of her body. Maybe it was his own grief, too raw and fresh to share. Maybe it was just the sense that she needed this anonymity, this brief escape from being Colonel Elena Morrison, legendary fighter pilot, tactical genius, the woman who never lost a wingman. Except she had lost one. Franklin knew that because he made it his business to know. Major Alex Turner, call sign Ghost. 8 months ago, combat mission over Afghanistan. Hydraulic failure. Elena had made it home. Ghost hadn't. Franklin lifted his bourbon in a silent toast to ghosts and memories and the children you couldn't save, no matter how hard you tried. He wouldn't approach her, not now. Let her have this flight. Let her pretend to be nobody for a few hours. Besides, what would he say? That he understood her pain because he'd lost his son? That guilt was a weight that never got lighter, only more familiar? That sometimes the people we train to be heroes die being exactly that, and we're left wondering if we should have trained them to run instead? No, some conversations you couldn't have at 35,000 feet with strangers listening. Franklin settled back into his seat and tried not to think about the folded flag waiting in his bag, or the grave he'd stand over tomorrow, or the daughter he'd never had who'd grown up to be everything her teacher had hoped, and more. The universe had strange timing, he thought, putting them both on the same plane. He just hoped it wasn't an omen. 4 rows back in economy, in seat 8B, Colonel Wade Hutchins pretended to sleep while his mind raced through the mission parameters one more time. At 50, Hutchins had spent his entire career in the Air Force without ever firing a shot in anger. He was an inspector general, a paper pusher, the guy who investigated other people's heroics to make sure they'd followed the rules while saving lives. He'd made peace with that career choice years ago. Someone had to mind the regulations. Someone had to make sure the cowboys stayed in line. But this assignment was different. This assignment made his stomach turn. 2 weeks ago, his superior at the Pentagon had called him into a secure briefing room and handed him a file marked "Classified, Eyes Only." Colonel Morrison, the superior had said, sliding a photograph across the table. Elena Morrison, in flight gear, standing beside an F-16, looking every inch the warrior she was. Call sign Phoenix. You know her? I know of her, sir. Everyone does. What do you know about Major Alex Turner? Hutchins had frowned. Ghost. Died 8 months ago. Afghanistan. Hydraulic failure during combat operations. Tragic but not uncommon. What if I told you it might not have been an accident? The words had hit Hutchins like a shockwave. Sir, we have intelligence suggesting that classified information regarding American military operations in Afghanistan may have been leaked to foreign actors. Intelligence that may have enabled targeted attacks on our aircraft. And you think Colonel Morrison? I don't think anything yet. That's why you're going to investigate. The superior had leaned forward. Morrison is flying commercial to D.C. in 2 weeks. You'll be on that flight. You'll approach her quietly, inform her that she's under investigation, and secure her cooperation. If she resists, or if you find evidence of wrongdoing, you have the authority to recommend immediate revocation of her security clearance. Hutchins had stared at the file, at the photograph of a decorated war hero, at the mission that felt wrong in his bones. Sir, with respect, Colonel Morrison is a legend. Her service record, her service record is exemplary, which is why, if she's been compromised, it's a disaster of unprecedented proportions. We need to know, Colonel, and we need to know quietly. So here Hutchins sat, 4 rows behind his target, with a briefcase full of classified documents and a mission that made him feel like a traitor to everything the uniform stood for. He'd studied Morrison's file for days, had watched video of her testimony before Congress about close air support tactics, had read after-action reports from commanders who'd served with her, had found nothing but glowing praise in documented heroism. And Ghost's death? The official report called it mechanical failure, catastrophic hydraulic malfunction, one of those terrible accidents that happened in combat zones where maintenance was challenging and operational tempo was brutal. But the intelligence report suggested otherwise. Suggested sabotage. Suggested someone had been feeding information to enemy forces, enabling them to target American aircraft at their most vulnerable moments. Hutchins didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to believe that the woman sitting 4 rows ahead, the legendary Phoenix, could be a traitor. But duty was duty, and doubt, once planted, grew like poison. He would wait until they landed in D.C., would approach her in the terminal, somewhere private but public enough to be safe, would inform her of the investigation and watch her reaction. If she was innocent, she'd cooperate. If she was guilty, she'd run. Either way, he'd know. Hutchins closed his eyes and tried to quiet the voice in his head that kept whispering that he was making a terrible mistake. The first sign of trouble came at 3:52 in the afternoon, Mountain Time, exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes into what should have been a routine 5-hour flight. Elena felt it in her bones before her conscious mind recognized the threat. A vibration, subtle, almost imperceptible, the kind of thing most passengers wouldn't notice, would chalk up to turbulence or the normal sounds of an aircraft in flight. But Elena had been flying for 18 years, had logged thousands of hours in fighters where every vibration, every unexpected sound, every change in the aircraft's behavior could mean the difference between life and death. This wasn't turbulence. This was something wrong. Her hand moved automatically to brace against the window frame, her pilot's instincts screaming, danger. She checked her watch out of habit, noting the time, the altitude displayed on the seatback screen, the position of the sun through the window. 35,000 feet over eastern Colorado. Clear skies, no weather, no reason for the aircraft to be vibrating like this. The vibration pulsed through the airframe like a heartbeat with an irregular rhythm. Too low frequency to be turbulence, too persistent to be normal. Elena had felt this before, in an F-16 over Kandahar province, when her hydraulic pump had begun its death spiral. Around her, the other passengers remained oblivious. Griffith Sterling continued his conference call. Deanna Harper was reading a story to her twin boys. The college students behind Elena were still laughing at their phones. But in first class, Franklin Blackwell felt it too. His hand tightened on his armrest. His eyes, which had been closed in remembrance and grief, snapped open. After 33 years of flying, you didn't forget what a dying aircraft felt like. Then the subtle vibration became a noticeable shudder. Coffee sloshed in plastic cups. Sterling looked up from his spreadsheet with mild annoyance. Across the aisle, Deanna instinctively pulled her boys closer, and Elena Morrison, who'd spent 8 months trying to forget the sound of her best friend dying over a radio, felt ice water replace the blood in her veins. Because she knew that vibration pattern, knew it like she knew her own heartbeat. This wasn't just mechanical failure. This was the same pattern that had killed Ghost. Captain Garrett Hollis's voice crackled over the intercom system, his tone carrying that practiced airline calm designed to reassure passengers even in the worst circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties. We're going to need everyone to return to their seats and fasten your seatbelts while we sort this out. Minor technical difficulties. Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd used those exact euphemistic words herself when her F-16's engine had caught fire at 25,000 feet over enemy territory. When she'd been fighting to keep her aircraft airborne long enough to reach friendly airspace. The careful understatement that every pilot learned: never panic the passengers, never admit how bad things really are. The shudder intensified, becoming a violent shake that rattled the overhead bins and sent loose items sliding across tray tables. Sterling's laptop snapped shut with a sharp crack. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. The college students behind Elena stopped laughing mid-sentence, their youthful confidence suddenly replaced by uncertainty. Elena's trained eye cataloged every symptom as the aircraft bucked and fought against invisible forces. The way the nose pitched slightly left and right, the irregular rhythm of the vibrations, the subtle changes in engine harmonics that most passengers wouldn't notice, but that screamed mechanical failure to anyone who'd spent their life listening to the language of aircraft in distress. Then came the sound that no passenger ever wants to hear, a grinding metallic screech from somewhere deep in the aircraft's belly, like giant gears stripping their teeth. It lasted for perhaps 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, Elena's military-trained mind processed a dozen possibilities. None of them good. Hydraulic failure. Had to be. Primary system, possibly secondary as well. The sound of backup pumps engaging and failing, of manual reversions kicking in, of flight controls fighting against mechanical resistance. In first class, Franklin Blackwell was already unbuckling his seatbelt, his bourbon forgotten. He'd heard that sound before. In Desert Storm, when his F-15's hydraulic lines had been shredded by ground fire. He'd barely made it home that day, wrestling a 30-ton fighter jet with nothing but cables and prayers. He started moving toward the cockpit. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat." Catherine Sullivan appeared beside him, her professional composure firmly in place despite the aircraft's increasingly erratic behavior. Franklin met her eyes. "Ma'am, I've been flying military aircraft since before you were born. I know what that sound means, and I know your pilots are about to have their hands very full." Catherine hesitated, her training warring with the authority in Franklin's voice and bearing. Then Captain Hollis's voice returned to the intercom, and this time the careful airline composure had cracked just enough to reveal the steel beneath. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for emergency procedures. Passengers, I need everyone to review your safety cards and prepare for a possible emergency landing." The word emergency cut through the cabin like a blade. The oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments with a collective thunk that seemed to echo like gunshots in the suddenly silent cabin. Yellow plastic cups dangled on their elastic tethers like exotic flowers, swaying with each violent shake of the aircraft. Around Elena, panic erupted like a flash flood. Sterling was hyperventilating, his face pale. Deanna Harper was crying as she struggled to get masks over her children's faces, while they wailed in confusion and fear. Someone in the back of the cabin was screaming, a high, keening sound that cut through the chaos like a siren. The college students weren't laughing anymore. One of them, a young woman with dark hair, was praying in rapid-fire whispers. Her friend gripped his armrest so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Throughout the cabin, 127 people were confronting their own mortality as the aircraft shuddered and bucked like a wild animal. But Elena Morrison's mind had shifted into a different mode entirely. The cold, analytical calm that had kept her alive through 100 combat missions over some of the most dangerous airspace on Earth. Her pilot's brain was already processing symptoms, calculating possibilities, running through emergency checklists that most people would never need to know. She recognized the signs with crystalline clarity: multiple hydraulic system failure, probably caused by a catastrophic rupture in the main distribution line. The flight controls were operating on manual reversion, which meant the pilots were fighting to control a 180,000-pound aircraft using nothing but raw muscle and whatever mechanical advantage the control cables could provide. The aircraft shuddered again, more violently this time, and Elena felt the deck angle increase as they entered what could only be described as an uncontrolled descent. Through her window, she could see the Colorado landscape rushing up to meet them, not in the gentle, controlled manner of a normal approach, but with the inexorable pull of gravity acting on a wounded bird. She'd been in this situation before, in a different aircraft over a different landscape, but the sick feeling in her stomach was exactly the same. The knowledge that everyone aboard, including herself, might not make it home to their families tonight. The understanding that in situations like this, the difference between life and death often came down to split-second decisions and the skill of the people in the cockpit. But this time, she wasn't in the cockpit. She was just a passenger in seat 13F, wearing civilian clothes, officially powerless to affect the outcome of this crisis. Except Elena Morrison had never accepted powerlessness as an option. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, fighting against the tilted deck and the violent shaking of the aircraft. Sterling looked at her with wild eyes. "What are you doing? You need to sit down." Elena ignored him. She made her way to the galley where Catherine was trying to secure loose items while maintaining her own composure. "I need to talk to the captain," Elena said, her voice cutting through the ambient chaos with startling clarity. Catherine turned, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat and—" "I'm a pilot," Elena interrupted. "United States Air Force. I've dealt with hydraulic failures before. Multiple system failures specifically. I can help." For a moment, Catherine hesitated, her training warring with intuition. FAA regulations were clear about unauthorized personnel in the cockpit, but as the aircraft shuddered again and tilted further into its uncontrolled descent, protocol seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford. "What kind of pilot?" Catherine asked, leaning closer to hear over the noise of the struggling aircraft. "Fighter pilot, F-16S mostly, but I've flown everything from trainers to transports." Elena's eyes never left Catherine's face. "I've brought damaged aircraft home before. I've been exactly where your captain is right now." Another violent shake decided the matter. "Follow me," Catherine said, reaching for her master key. As they fought their way toward the cockpit, Elena grabbed the intercom handset from its cradle near the forward galley. The cabin was awash in whispered prayers, muffled sobs, and the white noise of oxygen flowing through dozens of masks. But her voice cut through it all like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Elena Morrison, United States Air Force." The effect was immediate. The crying diminished to sniffles. The whispered panic gave way to focused attention. Even the college students behind her stopped their frightened murmuring and looked toward the front of the aircraft with something approaching hope. "I want everyone to listen to me very carefully. We are going to get through this, but I need each of you to stay calm and follow all instructions from the flight crew. We have excellent pilots up front, and I'm going to help them bring us home safely." Sterling caught her eye as she passed, his fear momentarily replaced by desperate hope. "You're really Air Force?" "Yes, sir, and we're going to be fine." She squeezed his shoulder briefly, a gesture both reassuring and somehow final, as if she was accepting responsibility for everyone aboard. Then she was moving past first class, and Franklin Blackwell was standing in the aisle. Their eyes met. Recognition slammed into both of them like a physical force. "Lieutenant Reese," Franklin said, his voice carrying the weight of 18 years and 1,000 memories. "Been a long time." Elena felt the world tilt on an axis that had nothing to do with the aircraft's failing systems. "General Blackwell? Sir, what are you—" "Burial detail," Franklin said simply. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw grief and purpose in equal measure. "But that can wait. You going to the cockpit?" Elena nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Franklin looked at her for a long moment, taking in the civilian clothes, the shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself like someone carrying a weight that might crush her at any moment. He'd seen that look before. In mirrors, in the faces of warriors who'd lost people they couldn't save. Then let's go to work, Colonel. The honorific hit Elena like a gentle blow. Not lieutenant anymore. Not the scared kid in the Nevada desert. Colonel. Phoenix. The woman she'd become in the 18 years since Franklin Blackwell had handed her wings and a call sign and told her to rise. Sir, I can handle... Elena. His voice was gentle but firm. I taught you damaged aircraft recovery when you were 20 years old. You think I forgot how? Despite everything, despite the terror and the memories and the aircraft dying around them, Elena felt something like relief flood through her. She wasn't alone. No, sir, you never forget anything. Then let's teach these airline boys how legends fly. Catherine used her key on the cockpit door. Inside, Elena found herself facing a scene that was both alien and familiar. The cramped cockpit of a commercial airliner instead of the familiar confines of an F-16, but the same desperate struggle between pilot and machine that she'd experienced over the mountains of Afghanistan. Captain Garrett Hollis and First Officer Morgan Whitfield were fighting their aircraft with the grim determination of professionals who understood exactly how slim their margins had become. Sweat beaded on Hollis's forehead despite the cool air conditioning. Whitfield's knuckles were white on her control yoke. Both pilots wore the focused expression of people performing emergency procedures from memory, while death waited just outside the margins of their skill. Captain, Elena announced herself, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of emergency checklists and radio calls. Colonel Elena Morrison, United States Air Force. I'd like to help if I can. Hollis's eyes flicked toward her, taking in her civilian clothes with obvious skepticism. The last thing he needed was some self-important passenger claiming expertise she didn't possess. Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but this is a complex situation and you've lost primary hydraulic pressure, Elena said, her eyes scanning the instrument panel with the rapid efficiency of someone reading familiar language. Backup system is failing, or already failed. You're getting maybe 15 to 20% response from your flight controls. You're using differential thrust to maintain heading and fighting the yoke just to keep us airborne. Both pilots stared at her. Hollis's skeptical expression shifted toward surprise, then towards something approaching respect. That assessment had taken her exactly 12 seconds, and every word of it was accurate. Your angle of attack is increasing because you're losing elevator authority, Elena continued, moving to the jump seat behind them without waiting for permission. Franklin followed, his presence filling the small cockpit with quiet authority. You've got maybe 10 minutes before this becomes unrecoverable. How long to nearest suitable airport? Denver International, Whitfield replied automatically, her voice tight with stress. 18 minutes at current ground speed. Too far, Elena said grimly. We need alternatives. What about Buckley Space Force Base? They've got long runways and crash equipment. 8 minutes, Whitfield said, checking her navigation display. But it's a military field and... Not anymore it isn't, Franklin said, already reaching for the radio. This is an emergency, and they'll roll out every piece of equipment they have. As Elena spoke, she was already mentally cataloging the emergency procedures that had saved her life over Afghanistan. Techniques for flying damaged aircraft that weren't taught in civilian flight schools, but were standard curriculum in military survival training. Hollis turned in his seat, studying Elena's face with the desperate calculation of a man drowning and being offered a rope that might be made of sand. How do you know all this? He demanded, his voice tight with stress and skepticism. Because I've been exactly where you are, Elena replied, settling into the jump seat and reaching for a headset. Different aircraft, same problem. I brought an F-16 home through enemy fire with total hydraulic failure over the Hindu Kush. Your Boeing has redundancies. My Falcon didn't. But the physics are identical. She keyed the radio microphone, her voice shifting into the crisp, professional tone of military aviation. Denver Center, United 847. This is Colonel Elena Morrison, United States Air Force, call sign Phoenix. On board assisting the flight crew with emergency procedures. Request immediate vector to Buckley Space Force Base and full emergency services. The brief silence that followed her transmission told Elena everything she needed to know. In air traffic control centers and military installations across the region, duty officers were processing what they just heard. Phoenix, the call sign that had become legend in fighter pilot circles. Spoken in the same breath as the great ones, the pilot who'd never lost a wingman, who'd pulled off impossible rescues, whose tactical innovations were taught at every fighter school. United 847, Denver Center, the controller's voice carried a new note of respect mixed with disbelief. Confirm call sign Phoenix. Colonel Morrison? Confirmed, Denver Center. Phoenix is on station and ready to work. Franklin leaned forward, adding his voice to the radio transmission. Denver Center, this is General Franklin Blackwell, retired, call sign Ironside. Also on board and assisting. Request you coordinate with Peterson Space Force Base Command. They'll want to know we're coming. Another pause, longer this time. The controller's voice, when it came back, was almost reverent. Phoenix and Ironside? Holy, roger that, sirs. All military installations are being notified. Stand by for coordination. Elena turned to Captain Hollis, who was watching her with an expression somewhere between hope and amazement. Garrett, she said, using his first name deliberately, claiming authority through familiarity. I need you to trust me. What I'm about to suggest is going to feel wrong. It's going to violate every procedure you've ever learned. But it's the only way we're going to save this airplane. Hollis studied her face for a long moment. In her eyes, he saw something he recognized from his own worst moments in the cockpit. The calm that comes from having stared down disaster before and refused to yield. The quiet confidence of someone who had earned the right to ask for trust. What do you need? He asked. Elena smiled for the first time since the emergency began. I need you to let Phoenix fly. At Denver Air Route Traffic Control Center, Controller Jake Drummond had been handling routine traffic for 6 hours when his carefully ordered world exploded into chaos. A radio transmission from United 847 stopped him cold, his hand freezing halfway to his coffee cup as the words, "Call sign Phoenix," echoed through his headset. Phoenix. Jake had been an Air Force controller before joining the FAA, had spent 4 years at Bagram Airfield, watching F-16s and A-10s launch into hostile skies. Every controller in military aviation knew that call sign, not just because of the pilot who carried it, but because of what it represented. Phoenix wasn't just a name, it was a legend built on impossible odds and extraordinary skill. Did she just say Phoenix? His supervisor, Carol Stevens, leaned over his shoulder, her own military background helping her recognize the significance of what they just heard. Yeah, Jake's hands were already moving across his console, pulling up emergency protocols and military liaison numbers. Phoenix and Ironside, both on the same aircraft. Jesus Christ, Carol breathed. Those two together wrote half the tactical manual. Jake keyed his microphone with the careful precision of someone who understood he was speaking to aviation royalty. Denver Center to United 847. Confirm call signs Phoenix and Ironside. Colonel Morrison and General Blackwell? Confirmed, Denver Center. Elena's voice came back through the static, crisp and professional despite the chaos surrounding her. Phoenix and Ironside on station and assisting with aircraft emergency. Request immediate coordination with military air traffic control and emergency services. Even over the radio, Jake could hear the unmistakable sounds of an aircraft in distress. The background noise of struggling engines, the subtle audio cues that told him United 847 was fighting for its life. But overlaying that mechanical symphony of failure was something else. Absolute calm and authority from the woman who had just identified herself as one of the most legendary pilots in modern Air Force history. Carol was already on the phone to Peterson Space Force Base, her voice urgent but controlled. This is Denver Center. We have an aircraft emergency involving Colonel Elena Morrison, call sign Phoenix, and General Franklin Blackwell, call sign Ironside. Yes, those Phoenix and Ironside. We need immediate military coordination and possible fighter escort. The response was immediate. Within 90 seconds, alerts were flashing on screens across 3 military installations. At Peterson, the command duty officer was pulling up service records that made his hands shake as he read them. Elena Morrison's file was so heavily redacted, it looked like someone had taken a magic marker to most of her operational history. But what was visible told the story of a warrior whose exploits had become legend. At Buckley Space Force Base, Major Jason Drummond was reviewing flight training schedules when his secure phone buzzed with an emergency alert. He read the message twice before the words sank in. United 847 in emergency. Phoenix on board. Ironside on board. Assistance required. Holy hell, he whispered, then caught himself. Even in crisis, military bearing demanded better. But this was Phoenix, the pilot whose tactical innovations were taught at the Air Force Academy, whose actions over Afghanistan had saved Forward Operating Base Chapman from being overrun, whose call sign was spoken with reverence in ready rooms from Langley to Kadena. And Ironside, the Desert Storm legend who'd trained half the current fighter force, both of them on a dying civilian aircraft. "Viper," he called to his wingman, Captain Sloan Brennan, who was across the ready room studying weather reports. "Emergency scramble. We're escorting a civilian aircraft." "What's the threat?" Sloan asked, already moving toward their gear. "No threat. Guardian Angel mission." Jason's voice carried an odd note of awe. "Phoenix and Ironside are aboard. They're helping fly a damaged airliner." Sloan stopped mid-stride. Like every fighter pilot in the Air Force, she knew the Phoenix story, or rather the dozen Phoenix stories that had become part of military lore. The emergency landing in a sandstorm that saved her wingman's life. The solo mission behind enemy lines to extract a downed pilot. The tactical manual she'd written that was now required reading at the academy. Phoenix Morrison? That Phoenix? That Phoenix. And she needs us. Within 4 minutes, 2 F-22 Raptors were rolling down the runway at Buckley, their afterburners painting the Colorado afternoon with controlled thunder. As they climbed toward their intercept point, Jason was already coordinating with air traffic control, his mind racing through the implications of what he just learned. At Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, Master Sergeant Boone McKenzie was reviewing maintenance schedules when a junior airman burst into his office. "Sergeant, you need to hear this. Phoenix is on the emergency frequency. She's helping fly a damaged civilian aircraft." Boone had served under Elena during her squadron command, had watched her bring home pilots who should have died, had seen her make decisions under pressure that left seasoned warriors shaking their heads in admiration. He grabbed his radio and tuned to the emergency frequency, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the volume. "Denver Center to United 847. The controller's voice crackled through the static. "Military escort is inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Colonel Morrison, we have Hawk flight of F-22s from Buckley en route to provide assistance." Elena's response came through calm and professional. "Denver Center, Phoenix. Appreciate the escort. We're maintaining heading for Buckley, but I need you to coordinate with approach control. We're going to need every foot of runway they can give us, and this approach is going to be unconventional." Boone smiled despite his worry. Unconventional, from Elena Morrison, usually meant something that would be impossible for anyone else. As word continued to spread through military channels, a remarkable thing began happening at air bases across the country. Off-duty personnel who heard about Phoenix being aboard the troubled aircraft began gathering in operations centers and ready rooms, following the emergency on military frequencies. Pilots who'd flown with her, maintainers who'd serviced her aircraft, controllers who'd guided her home from missions, all united by respect for a warrior who'd earned her place in the pantheon of aviation legends. At Edwards Air Force Base, test pilots paused their experimental flights to listen. At Shaw Air Force Base, A-10 pilots gathered around radios, remembering joint training exercises where Elena had taught them close air support techniques that saved lives. The story was bigger now than just one aircraft in distress. It had become a moment when the entire military aviation community held its collective breath, waiting to see if their legendary Phoenix could rise from the ashes one more time. And somewhere over the Colorado landscape, at the controls of a Boeing 757 with failing hydraulics and 127 souls on board, Colonel Elena Morrison was about to remind the world why legends are born from moments when ordinary people do extraordinary things. But first, she had to deal with a man in seat 8B who had just stormed into the cockpit with murder in his eyes and accusations on his lips. Colonel Wade Hutchins looked at Elena Morrison and saw everything his mission had warned him about. The legendary pilot, the decorated hero, the woman who might be a traitor. "Colonel Morrison," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, "you're under investigation for violations of rules of engagement that resulted in the death of Major Alex Turner. You are ordered to stand down immediately." The cockpit fell silent, except for the sound of the struggling aircraft. Elena turned slowly to face Hutchins, her expression unreadable. "Colonel," she said quietly, 127 people are about to die if I don't help these pilots. Your investigation can wait." "You're not fit for duty," Hutchins pressed. "Your judgment is compromised. Your actions led to Ghost's death, and I have evidence." Franklin Blackwell moved faster than a 68-year-old man had any right to move. He stepped between Elena and Hutchins, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 33 years of command and the fury of a man who'd spent 16 years drowning in his own guilt. "Colonel Hutchins," Franklin said, his voice dangerously soft, "you will stand down, or I will have you removed from this cockpit by force. Your choice." Hutchins drew himself up. "Sir, with all due respect, you're retired. You have no authority here. And Colonel Morrison is under investigation for—" "Son." Franklin stepped forward, closing the distance until he was inches from Hutchins's face. "I earned my stars saving lives while you were still in diapers. I buried friends, students, and my own child. And I will be damned if I let some paper-pushing inspector with delusions of importance interfere with this woman saving 127 innocent people." He paused, let the words hang in the air. "Now, get out." The command cracked like a whip. Hutchins looked at Franklin, at Elena, at the pilots who were watching with barely concealed hope, and felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was the altitude. Maybe it was the look in Franklin's eyes. Maybe it was just the sickening realization that he might have been wrong about everything. He backed toward the cockpit door. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. As the door closed behind him, Elena clenched her fists to keep them steady on the instruments. Not from fear, from rage, grief. 8 months of guilt that had just been weaponized against her in front of strangers. "Sir," she whispered, her voice cracking, "what if he's right? What if Ghost died because I—" Franklin grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Elena Reese Morrison, listen to me. Ghost died because war is hell, and aircraft fail, and sometimes good people die no matter what we do. Not because you weren't good enough. You're the best pilot I ever trained, the best I ever saw. And right now, 127 people need you to be that pilot. Understood?" Elena drew a shaking breath, then another. Then she nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. Now let's show them what Phoenix can do." At 39,000 feet above the snow-capped peaks of the Colorado Rockies, United Flight 847 looked like a wounded eagle fighting against gravity itself. Major Jason Drummond eased his F-22 Raptor into formation 500 feet off the airliner's right wing. The contrast between the sleek fighter and the struggling commercial aircraft, telling the story of two different worlds of aviation, suddenly united by crisis. The Boeing 757 wallowed through the thin air, its control surfaces moving in erratic, jerky motions as the flight crew fought to maintain even basic stability. From his cockpit, Jason could see the telltale signs of an aircraft in severe distress. The slight nose-down attitude that indicated loss of elevator authority. The wings that rocked unpredictably despite the calm air. The engine exhaust temperatures that suggested the pilots were using differential thrust to maintain control. United 847, Hawk Flight has you in sight. Jason's voice carried the calm professionalism that had made him one of the Air Force's most respected pilots. Phoenix, Ironside, this is Major Drummond. How can we assist? Inside the commercial airliner's cockpit, Elena Morrison was deep in what fighter pilots called the zone. That state of hyper-aware calm where time seemed to slow down and complex problems became manageable puzzles. Her hands moved across the unfamiliar Boeing instruments with growing confidence. Years of emergency training, translating across aircraft types with the fluidity of someone who truly understood the science of flight. Hawk Flight, Phoenix. Good to hear friendly voices up here. Elena's transmission carried just a hint of her legendary dry humor, even in the midst of crisis. We're looking at Buckley for emergency landing, but first I need you to coordinate some magic with approach control. She paused to help Captain Hollis adjust their heading as the aircraft's compromised flight controls fought against even small course corrections. First Officer Whitfield was managing their emergency checklist with methodical precision, her calm professionalism providing the steady rhythm that kept the cockpit functioning despite the chaos. I need runway 19er cleared and held, Elena continued. Every piece of emergency equipment they can muster. And Jason, I know you're thinking textbook approach procedures, but throw that manual out the window. We're going to be coming in fast, steep, and probably sideways. This is going to be all about energy management and hoping we can bleed off enough speed before we run out of runway. Copy that, Phoenix, already coordinating with Tower. But even as Jason acknowledged her request, his mind was processing the implications of what he'd just heard. Elena Morrison, the Phoenix, was essentially telling him that she was about to attempt a landing that would challenge every principle of commercial aviation safety. And yet, if anyone could pull off the impossible, it was the pilot whose call sign had become synonymous with miraculous recoveries. In his left seat, Captain Sloan Brennan was monitoring emergency frequencies as military installations across the region checked in with offers of assistance. The response was unprecedented, not just because of the civilian aircraft in distress, but because of who was helping to fly it. Hawk, this is Cheyenne Mountain. We're tracking your emergency. Be advised, we have Phoenix's complete service record on screen. Her innovations in damaged aircraft recovery are impressive. Jason smiled grimly. Impressive was military understatement at its finest. Elena's techniques for flying compromised aircraft had been incorporated into Air Force training manuals after she'd successfully landed 3 different aircraft that should have killed her, including the legendary incident over Afghanistan when she'd brought home an F-16 with 70% of its control surfaces destroyed by enemy fire. Cheyenne Mountain, Hawk, Phoenix is Phoenix, she's got this. But the weight of expectation was building with each radio transmission. At Peterson Space Force Base, duty officers were briefing senior staff. At Nellis Air Force Base, Master Sergeant McKenzie was coordinating with a dozen other bases as reports came in from across the military aviation community. Peterson, this is Nellis Maintenance. Phoenix once dead-sticked a battle-damaged Falcon through a sandstorm to save her wingman. If anyone can bring home a busted Boeing, it's her. The response from Peterson carried the voice of someone who clearly knew Elena personally. Nellis, understood. We have full emergency services staged, but make no mistake, this landing is going to push the limits of what's physically possible. Inside the cockpit of United 847, Elena was oblivious to the growing legend being built around her emergency landing attempt. Her entire world had narrowed to airspeed indicators, attitude displays, and the delicate balance of keeping 180,000 pounds of aluminum and humanity airborne on barely responsive controls. "Garrett," she said to Captain Hollis, "I need you to start thinking like a test pilot. Everything we're about to do is going to feel wrong. We're going to approach faster than any commercial aircraft should. We're going to use techniques that aren't in any civilian manual. But trust me, I've been here before." Hollis's hands were steady on his controls, but sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool cockpit air. "Elena, I've got 25 years with this airline. I've never had a passenger save my aircraft before. And I've never been a passenger on someone else's emergency," Elena replied with a slight smile. "Guess we're both breaking new ground today." Through the cockpit windows, they could see the F-22s holding perfect formation, their pilots ready to provide whatever assistance possible. It was a sight that would have been unthinkable in normal circumstances. America's most advanced fighters escorting a commercial airliner like protective guardian angels. Franklin Blackwell stood behind the pilot's seats, his presence a steadying force in the cramped space. He'd been exactly where Elena was now, had made the same impossible calculations, fought the same losing battle against physics and mechanical failure. But he'd never done it with 127 civilian lives depending on the outcome. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "Remember Nevada, the dead stick landing I said was impossible." Elena's hands paused momentarily on the instruments. "The one where you said only suicidal idiots attempted. The one where you proved that genius and suicide look identical until you succeed." Franklin's slate eyes met hers in the reflection of the instrument panel. "That's what we're doing here. Something impossible. Something that'll look like madness until it works." Elena nodded slowly. "And if it doesn't work? Then we tried, and trying is all we ever get to do." But then the aircraft shuddered violently, and a new alarm began to blare. The secondary hydraulic system, which had been limping along on emergency backup, chose that moment to fail completely. Morgan Whitfield's voice was tight but controlled. "Captain, we just lost all hydraulic pressure. We're flying on cables and prayers." Elena felt the control inputs change beneath her guiding hands. What had been difficult was now nearly impossible. The backup steering was gone. They had only differential thrust to control direction. Only gravity and whatever aerodynamic authority the control surfaces could provide through raw mechanical linkage. This was exactly how Ghost had died. For a moment, Elena was back over Afghanistan, Ghost's final transmission echoing in her memory, his voice calm and accepting, his order to leave him, to keep flying, to keep saving people. "Promise me, Elena." She'd made that promise, and she'd broken it every day since by drowning in guilt instead of honoring his sacrifice. Her vision tunneled. Her breath came in short gasps. The absolute certainty that she couldn't do this, that she was going to fail again, that 127 people were going to die because she wasn't good enough. Franklin saw it happening, recognized the signs of someone drowning in their own head. He knelt beside the jump seat, his old knees protesting, and put his hand on her shoulder. "Elena, look at me." She couldn't look away from the instruments that were screaming failure, from the memory of Ghost's final words, from the weight of 127 lives that she was about to let down. "Colonel Morrison," Franklin's voice was sharp now, carrying the command authority that had led men through Desert Storm. "Look at me. That's an order." Elena's eyes snapped to his. "My son died flying," Franklin said quietly. "Ethan. He was 26. Iraq, 2008. HIP failure, just like this. He could have ejected, should have ejected, but his wingman was in trouble, and Ethan stayed with his bird long enough to make sure the kid got out safe." Elena felt something crack in her chest. "For 16 years I blamed myself," Franklin continued. "Thought if I hadn't pushed him, hadn't made him want to be like his old man, he'd still be alive. I almost ate my gun 3 times. Almost joined him. Sir, But then I realized something. Franklin's grip on her shoulder tightened. Ethan didn't die because of me. He died doing exactly what he was born to do, saving someone who couldn't save themselves. And Ghost? Ghost didn't die because of you. He died making sure you could keep being Phoenix, keep saving people. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, hot and shameful and utterly unstoppable. I couldn't save him, she whispered. No, you couldn't, because some things can't be saved. Some people die, and there's nothing you can do about it except honor them by living. Franklin's voice softened. So here's your choice, Colonel. Honor Ghost's death by quitting, by letting these 127 people die because you're too scared to try, or honor his life by being the Phoenix he knew you were. Elena drew a shaking breath, then another. In her mind, she heard Ghost's final words, the important ones. You're going to save so many people after this. Promise me. She'd made that promise. And Elena Morrison didn't break promises. I'm not quitting, she said, her voice steady now. Not ever. Franklin smiled. There's my Phoenix. Elena wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders, and turned back to the instruments with renewed focus. Garrett, Morgan, she said, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who'd made a decision and would see it through or die trying. Here's what we're going to do. At Denver International Airport, the scene along the perimeter fence resembled a military operation more than a civilian emergency response. 43 emergency vehicles lined the taxiways and runways, fire trucks with specialized aircraft firefighting foam, ambulances equipped for mass casualty events, crash recovery equipment, hazmat teams, mobile command centers. Colorado Air National Guard helicopters circled at a safe distance, their crews ready to provide additional medical evacuation if needed. Fire Chief Robert Garrison stood in the command vehicle coordinating with incident commanders from multiple agencies. All units, this is command. Aircraft is beginning final approach. Based on the pilot's reputation and the military escort, we're expecting a successful recovery. But be ready for anything. This landing is going to be unconventional. On runway 19 at Buckley Space Force Base, every piece of emergency equipment the military could muster had been positioned. The runway, designed to handle massive cargo aircraft and the occasional fighter emergency, stretched nearly 13,000 feet. But even that might not be enough for what was coming. Denver approach, United 847 with Hawk Flight escort. Elena's voice came through every speaker in the tower, in the command centers, on the emergency frequencies that dozens of military bases were monitoring. Beginning final approach, runway 19. Be advised this approach is non-standard. We'll be using military emergency procedures adapted for civilian aircraft. United 847, Denver approach. Ma'am, you're cleared for any approach you deem necessary. All traffic has been diverted. Emergency services are standing by. The controller's voice carried a note of awe that wasn't lost on anyone listening. Word had spread about who was helping to fly the damaged aircraft. The military grapevine had done its work. Everyone from the tower controllers to the crash crews knew that Phoenix was aboard, that Ironside was with her, that 2 generations of legendary aviators were about to attempt something that would either go down in history as brilliant or catastrophic. All stations, this is Phoenix. Elena's voice was calm, professional, carrying across frequencies to the hundreds of people now following their emergency. We're coming home. Stand by. At 1,000 feet above ground level, with Buckley's runway stretching before them like a lifeline, Elena walked Captain Hollis and First Officer Whitfield through the approach procedures she developed over 18 years of flying damaged aircraft. We're coming in at 180 knots instead of the normal 140, she explained, her hands guiding Hollis's inputs with the precision of a surgeon. The hydraulic failure means we can't use speed brakes effectively, so we need the extra airspeed for control authority. It's going to feel like we're screaming toward the ground. Trust the physics. Elena, in all my years flying, I've never had to do anything like this, Hollis said, his voice tight with tension, but steady with determination. And in all my years, I've never tried to save a Boeing with airline procedures, Elena replied. We're both breaking new ground, but we're breaking it together. 500 feet, the runway rushed up to meet them. Emergency vehicles raced along parallel taxiways, keeping pace with their approach. Morgan, call out airspeed every 10 knots, Elena said. We're riding the edge of a stall all the way down. 185 knots, Whitfield called out. 400 feet. Through the windscreen, Elena could see the emergency responders, could see the military personnel gathered to watch, could see the F-22s holding formation off their wings like honor guard. 300 feet. 182. Good. Garrett, start your flare at 50 feet. Keep it shallow. We want to fly this airplane onto the runway, not drop it. 200 feet. 180. In the passenger cabin, 127 souls held their breath. Deanna Harper clutched her twin boys. Griffith Sterling had abandoned his spreadsheets and joined hands with the stranger beside him. Tyler Aldridge gripped his mother's hand and whispered prayers he'd learned in Sunday school. 100 feet. Then the nose gear indicator flashed red. Unsafe indication, Whitfield called out. Nose gear isn't locked. Elena's mind raced through the calculations in milliseconds. The hydraulic failure had affected the landing gear deployment. The nose gear had come down, but hadn't locked into position. If it collapsed on landing, the aircraft would cartwheel. 180,000 pounds tumbling across the runway at highway speeds. Everyone would die. But before Hollis could respond, a new voice cut through the cockpit radio. Colonel Wade Hutchins, his voice tight with panic and shame. Colonel Morrison, I need to tell you something. My phone. There's a remote trigger. They told me it was just for documentation, but I think it's connected to something in the cargo hold. Elena's blood turned to ice. Where's the phone now, Colonel? I threw it out the galley service door 30 seconds ago. I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill you all. Franklin's voice was hard as steel. Son, when we land, you'd better pray that phone is the only evidence we find. Yes, sir. I know, sir. Elena forced her mind back to the immediate crisis. Sabotage device or not, they still had to land this aircraft. And they had seconds, not minutes. We land anyway, Elena said, her voice allowing no argument. No choice. Garrett, hold the nose off as long as possible. Let main gear take the weight first. We'll bring the nose down gentle when we bled off speed. If it collapses, Hollis started, then we deal with it. But we don't quit. We never quit. 50 feet. 175. Flare now, Garrett. Easy pressure back. That's it. The main landing gear kissed the concrete with barely more impact than a normal landing. The Boeing's nose stayed elevated as they bled speed, the crippled nose gear still dangling unsecured. Hold it, Elena coached. 150, 140, 130. The aircraft rolled down the runway, its nose held high by Hollis's strength and Elena's guidance. Emergency vehicles paced them, ready to respond. 120, 110, 100. Bring the nose down now. Gentle, gentle. The nose gear touched the runway, held for 1 second, 2, 3, then locked into place with an audible clunk that resonated through the entire airframe. Reverse thrust maximum, Elena commanded. Morgan, call out speed. 100 knots, 90, 80. The aircraft shuddered as Hollis pulled the throttle levers into full reverse. The engines screamed in protest as they fought to slow 180,000 pounds of momentum. 70, 60, 50. Emergency vehicles surrounded them now, ready for anything. 40, 30, 20. Finally, mercifully, United Flight 847 rolled to a complete stop, just 800 yards from the threshold of runway 19er. The silence in the cockpit was profound. broken only by the sound of four people breathing heavily and the distant wail of approaching emergency vehicles. Captain Hollis's voice was hoarse with exhaustion and disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Buckley Space Force Base." The cabin erupted in applause, tears, and prayers of gratitude. But Elena Morrison, still wearing the jeans and sweater that had marked her as just another passenger 3 hours earlier, wasn't finished yet. "Garrett, Morgan," she said quietly, "we need to get these people off this aircraft quickly and safely. The emergency isn't over until everyone's on the ground." As the first emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft and portable stairs approached the main door, Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. Through the cockpit window, she could see something that made her catch her breath. Military personnel were arriving at the base, not just the expected accident investigators and officials, but active duty and retired Air Force members from across Colorado. Word had spread through the aviation community with lightning speed, and they had come to honor one of their own. Major Drummond stood near the aircraft in his flight suit, having landed his F-22 moments earlier. Behind him, a growing crowd of military personnel waited in respectful formation. Franklin stood and placed his hand on Elena's shoulder. "Time to face your public, Colonel." Elena shook her head. "I don't want recognition. I just want to go home." "Too late for that. You're Phoenix. These people need to see you, need to know that heroes are real." The first passenger to emerge from United Flight 847 was 8-year-old Tyler Aldridge, his small hand gripping his mother Linda's tightly as they descended the portable stairs onto the tarmac. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and the boy's eyes went wide as he took in the unprecedented scene surrounding their aircraft. Dozens of emergency vehicles, military personnel in dress uniforms, news cameras capturing every moment. "Mom, look," Tyler whispered, pointing toward the formation of Air Force personnel standing at rigid attention near the aircraft. "They're all saluting." Linda followed her son's gaze and felt tears spring to her eyes. She'd heard the announcements, had listened to the other passengers talking about the Air Force colonel who had helped save their lives. But seeing the military's response made the reality hit home with stunning force. Her family had been saved by a genuine American hero. Behind them, the stream of passengers continued. Deanna Harper emerged with her twin boys, pausing at the bottom of the stairs to look back at the aircraft that had brought them safely home. Griffith Sterling, the businessman who had abandoned his quarterly projections in favor of prayer, stepped onto the tarmac with tears streaming down his face. Inside the cockpit, Elena was completing the final shutdown procedures with Hollis and Whitfield. Her hands moved across the Boeing's controls one last time, securing systems and ensuring the aircraft was safe for the investigation teams that would soon swarm over every component. "Elena," Captain Hollis said quietly, his voice still hoarse from stress, "I've been flying commercial aircraft for 25 years. I've never experienced anything like what you just did. You didn't just help us land this airplane, you saved 127 lives." Elena looked up from the checklist. "Garrett, you and Morgan did the flying. I just provided some technical consultation. This was a team effort from beginning to end." Morgan Whitfield shook her head with a slight smile. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that was the most extraordinary display of airmanship I've ever witnessed. You took a situation that should have been catastrophic and made it look almost routine." Before Elena could respond, Catherine Sullivan appeared at the cockpit door. The flight attendant's professional composure had finally cracked, and tears were visible in her eyes. "Colonel Morrison, there are some people outside who would like to see you." Elena followed Catherine through the aircraft's main door and stepped into a scene that took her breath away. On the tarmac below, she found herself facing a formation of military personnel that seemed to have materialized from every corner of Colorado's aviation community. Active duty officers, retired veterans, Air National Guard members, even military spouses and children, all standing in respectful formation. At the front of the group stood Major Drummond, still wearing his flight suit from the F-22 escort mission. His wingman, Captain Brennan, stood beside him. Behind them, Elena recognized faces from across her career. Former squadron mates, pilots she had trained, ground crew members who had serviced her aircraft during countless deployments. And there, standing slightly apart from the formation, was Master Sergeant Boone Mackenzie. 52 years old now, weathered by 2 decades of maintaining fighters in combat zones. He'd served under Elena in Afghanistan, had been there the night Ghost died, had watched her carry that guilt for 8 months. Their eyes met and Boone nodded slowly, a gesture of respect, of understanding, of forgiveness for sins that had never needed forgiving. "Colonel Morrison," Major Drummond called out, his voice carrying across the tarmac with military precision. "On behalf of the United States Air Force and the aviation community, we request permission to render honors." Elena felt a moment of overwhelming emotion crash over her like a wave. These weren't just military personnel paying respects to a superior officer. These were warriors honoring one of their own, recognizing not just her actions on this day, but the lifetime of service that had led to this moment. "Permission granted," she replied, her voice steady despite the turbulence in her heart. Major Drummond snapped to attention and rendered a crisp salute. His wingman followed immediately. Then, like dominoes falling in perfect sequence, every military member present came to attention and saluted. Active duty, retired, officers, enlisted, representing every branch of service but united in their respect for the woman who had just reminded the world what it meant to answer the call when duty demanded everything. The moment stretched across the tarmac in profound silence, broken only by the distant sound of aircraft engines and the click of news cameras capturing an image that would grace front pages across the nation. Elena Morrison, still wearing the civilian clothes she had put on that morning for a simple flight home, stood perfectly erect and returned the salute with the same precision she had learned as a cadet 26 years earlier. Franklin Blackwell stood at the top of the aircraft stairs, watching the scene unfold below. His eyes were wet with tears he no longer tried to hide. This, he thought, this was why Ethan had wanted to fly. Why every young man and woman who put on the uniform did so. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for this moment when the impossible became possible, because someone refused to accept failure as an option. As the salute concluded, individual members of the formation began to step forward. Boone Mackenzie was first. "Colonel, it's an honor to serve with you again, ma'am. You haven't changed, still making the impossible look easy." Behind him came others, each carrying their own piece of the Phoenix legend. A young captain whom Elena had trained as a lieutenant. A crew chief who had serviced her aircraft during 3 deployment rotations. A controller who had guided her home through a sandstorm when visibility was 0 and fuel was critical. But the most meaningful moment came when Tyler Aldridge broke away from his mother and approached Elena with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Ma'am, are you really a fighter pilot?" Elena knelt down to meet his eyes, her expression softening into the warmth that her squadron members had always seen, but the public rarely witnessed. "I am, Tyler, and today I got to help Captain Hollis and First Officer Whitfield fly your airplane home safely. My dad says fighter pilots are the bravest people in the world," Tyler continued with 8-year-old logic. "Are you brave?" Elena considered the question seriously, the way she would any technical inquiry about aviation or tactics. "I think brave people are just regular people who do what needs to be done when others are counting on them. Today, everyone on that airplane was brave. Your mom, the other passengers, the flight crew, we all worked together. Will you sign my boarding pass?" "I'd be honored." Elena took out her pen and wrote carefully on the crumpled piece of paper Tyler produced from his pocket. To Tyler, remember that heroes are ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. Aim high. Colonel Elena Phoenix Morrison, USAF. As she handed the boarding pass back, Elena noticed that other passengers were approaching. Deanna Harper wanted to introduce her children. Griffith Sterling simply wanted to shake her hand and thank her for giving him another chance at life. What struck Elena most profoundly was not the recognition from her military colleagues, though that meant more to her than she could express, but the impact on the civilian passengers who had shared her unexpected journey. Franklin appeared at her side as the crowd began to disperse. "You did good, Colonel." Elena turned to face her old instructor, her mentor, the man who had taught her to rise from ashes 18 years ago. "Sir, I couldn't have done it without you. When I froze, when the PTSD hit, you brought me back." Franklin shook his head gently. "No, Elena, you brought yourself back. I just reminded you of who you've always been." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. When he unfolded it, Elena saw a pair of pilot wings, old ones, worn smooth by years of wear, the kind issued to Air Force pilots in the 1990s. "These belong to my son," Franklin said quietly. "Ethan wore them in Iraq, the day he died saving his wingman." Elena's throat tightened. "Sir, I can't." "Yes, you can, and you will." Franklin pressed the wings into her palm. "Ethan would want you to have them. You're the daughter I never got to watch grow up, the pilot he wanted to be, the hero he died being." He closed her fingers around the wings. "Pass them to someone who needs to rise from their ashes someday. Keep the legacy alive." Elena couldn't speak, could only nod as tears streamed down her face. Frank pulled her into an embrace, and for a moment they stood there, teacher and student, father and daughter, two warriors who had stared into the abyss and refused to fall. "Thank you, sir," Elena whispered, "for everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "That's what mentors do," Franklin replied. "We hold the light when yours goes out, and someday you'll do the same for someone else." As they separated, Elena saw Colonel Wade Hutchins being led away by security forces in handcuffs. He caught her eye as he passed, and she saw something in his expression that looked like shame and relief in equal measure. She thought about saying something, about forgiving him or condemning him or asking why. But instead she just nodded, a gesture that acknowledged his humanity, his failure, his choice, in the end, to do the right thing. Hutchins nodded back, and something passed between them, an understanding that everyone carries burdens, everyone makes mistakes, and sometimes redemption looks like choosing not to make things worse. 6 months later, Elena would testify at his court-martial, would tell the panel that Colonel Hutchins had been manipulated by foreign intelligence, that he'd made the right choice when it mattered most, that his confession had saved 127 lives. The panel would reduce his sentence from 20 years to 5, dishonorable discharge to other than honorable. A small mercy for a man who'd chosen redemption at the last possible second. Elena never spoke to him again, but she thought about him sometimes, about how close he'd come to being a mass murderer, about how one choice, one moment of clarity had saved his soul, if not his career. Some people rose from ashes, others simply stopped adding fuel to the fire. Both were forms of survival. 3 years later, on a bright Nevada morning that felt almost identical to that day in 2006, Brigadier General Elena Morrison stood at the edge of the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base, watching a young lieutenant struggle with her final evaluation. Lieutenant Kara Severin was 23 years old, brilliant, and terrified. Elena could see it in the set of her shoulders, in the way her hands trembled as she completed her pre-flight, in the expression that said she was one failure away from washing out. The male instructors stood in the hangar shadow, their voices carrying across the superheated air. "She doesn't have the aggression, doesn't have the edge. Too hesitant, too careful, she'll never make it." Elena felt something crystallize inside her, a memory of another frightened lieutenant, another day when everything hung in the balance. She walked across the tarmac toward Kara, who snapped to attention as she approached. "Lieutenant Severin, walk with me." They moved away from the aircraft, away from the watching eyes and whispered doubts. Do you know what these are? Elena held out Ethan Blackwell's wings, worn smooth by 3 years of her carrying them. No, ma'am. These belong to Major Ethan Blackwell. He died in Iraq in 2008, saving his wingman. His father gave them to me 3 years ago, after I almost gave up. Elena's voice was gentle, but firm. He told me that heroes aren't born, they're forged in fire, and the ones who rise are the ones who refuse to stay down. Kara looked at the wings, then at Elena. Ma'am, I keep failing. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't have what it takes. 3 years ago, I froze in a cockpit. PTSD, guilt, fear. I had 127 people depending on me, and I almost quit. Elena met Kara's eyes. But someone reminded me that we don't fly for glory. We fly so others can live. She pressed the wings into Kara's palm. Prove them wrong. Like I did. Like Ethan did. Like his father taught me. Kara looked at the wings, then at her waiting aircraft, then back at Elena. Something shifted in her expression. Fear giving way to determination. Yes, ma'am. 2 hours later, Elena stood in the observation tower with Franklin Blackwell, who was now 71 and had driven 3 hours just to watch. Together, they watched Kara execute a flawless dead-stick landing. The same impossible maneuver Elena had performed 18 years ago. The same one Franklin had said only suicidal idiots attempted. The same one that had made Phoenix a legend. As Kara climbed out of her aircraft, pumping her fist in triumph, while her instructors stood in stunned silence, Franklin turned to Elena. You know, Franklin said quietly, watching Kara celebrate with her instructors, who were no longer doubting. Ethan would have loved this. Seeing the legacy continue, seeing you pass on what I gave you. Elena glanced at him, saw the peace in his weathered face. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer consumed him. You gave me more than flying skills, sir. You gave me the courage to rise, every single time. Franklin smiled. And you gave an old man a reason to believe his son's death meant something. That the cycle continues. That heroes make heroes, all the way down. He paused, looking at the Nevada sky that had witnessed so many legends born. I'm retiring. For real this time. 71 is too old to keep haunting flight lines. He chuckled. But I'll be watching, waiting to see who you make into legends next. Thank you, Ironside, for everything. No, Phoenix, thank you. They shook hands and Elena knew this was goodbye. Not forever, but to this chapter. Franklin had given her wings. She'd proven worthy of them, and now she'd given them to someone else. The circle was complete. You know what the difference between us and them is? Franklin asked, gesturing toward the instructors. What, sir? We know the secret. Heroes aren't born. They're forged in fire. And the ones who rise are the ones who refuse to stay down. Like a phoenix, Elena said softly. Like a phoenix, Franklin agreed. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the next generation celebrate their own moment of triumph, watching the legacy continue, watching the cycle of rising and lifting others begin again. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Ghost smiled, because his phoenix had kept her promise, had kept flying, had kept saving people, had kept rising from the ashes, just like she always would. 7 years later, the Air Force Academy briefing room fell silent as Brigadier General Kara Severin stepped to the podium. At 30 years old, she wore her own legends now. 2 combat deployments, 43 combat missions, a call sign earned in fire, Ember. Because embers, someone had said, are what phoenixes leave behind to start new fires. She held up a pair of worn pilot wings, the same ones Elena Morrison had given her 7 years ago, the ones Ethan Blackwell had worn, the ones that carried 3 generations of rising from ashes. These wings, Kara said to the room full of cadets, belonged to a hero who died saving his wingman. They were passed to another hero who saved 127 civilians. She passed them to me when I was about to quit. She found a face in the crowd. A young woman, 19, terrified, on the edge of washing out. Today, I'm passing them to someone who needs to remember. Heroes aren't born. They're forged in fire, and the ones who rise are the ones who refuse to stay down. She walked into the crowd and stopped in front of the young cadet. "What's your name, Lieutenant?" "Reese, ma'am. Lieutenant Sarah Reese." Kara's breath caught. The universe had a sense of humor. Or perhaps Elena Morrison did. "Well, Lieutenant Reese, time to live up to that name." She pressed Ethan's wings into Sarah's palm. "Make us proud. Make yourself prouder." As Kara walked back to the podium, she thought about Franklin Blackwell, dead now for 4 years, buried at Arlington with his son. About Ghost, whose sacrifice had haunted Elena until she'd learned to honor it instead. About Elena Morrison herself, now a major general, who'd sent Kara a simple message this morning. Phoenix makes ember, makes spark. The fire never dies, it just changes form. Kara smiled and began her briefing on advanced combat tactics. Behind her, Lieutenant Sarah Reese clutched a pair of wings that had traveled through 30 years, 3 wars, and 4 generations of warriors who refused to stay down. The legacy continued. The fire never died. Some called it Phoenix Protocol. Others called it what it really was: hope.